Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Good afternoon. First, a quick introduction from my side. My name is الثاني. I'm a partner with EY's financial services team, and I'm also the banking leader for EY in the MENA region, and I look after specifically business transformation and digital transformation. So today I'm actually stepping in for my partner Suruj, who was supposed to do this session. However, he had a personal urgent matter, and as such, he apologizes, and I'm stepping in on his behalf. So to take us through today for the next probably around 20 to 30 minutes, we will go through a point of view on how specifically financial services are shaping when it comes to the impact of COVID-19 and many implications as a result of that from a macro and geopolitical perspective. As was mentioned, please do not forget to include your questions, and we'll take them towards the end. Starting off, if we can have please the presentation displayed. Looking at what has happened over the past couple of years, and we're trying to relate that not just from a global perspective, but also from a local and regional perspective. We've had a continuous changing political landscape from the different changes on the global political scene with the new, in a way, US president coming in, a change in the regional political landscape, which has actually created a more positive outlook from a GCC perspective. On the technological landscape, we're seeing definitely a massive influx and growth from a tech and fintech perspective, which is presenting a major competition to banks and financial services. And specifically, when we talk about tech things, companies like Google, Samsung, and others going into the financial services landscape, in addition to the fintechs, which is now probably a much wider and more known topic as well. The other part is the continuous demand on the technology architecture to meet customer demands and the evolving landscape around the cloud enablement agenda. The other third circle of pressure, if we can look at it as such, is basically a continuous low interest environment, but also a potential increase of inflation over the past couple of years, and projected outlook, although there are different points of views on that if we look at the ECB front versus others. However, this is also a result of the significant government stimulus that has been plugged in as a result of COVID specifically, and the landscape has impacted on a number of industries as well, which has created a volatile corporate environment. So when we look at the financial services landscape, and specifically the banking landscape, not just globally, but also regionally and locally, they have been operating in the eye of the storm. And in a way, it is a perfect storm, specifically driving all of these three landscapes, which has presented a significant and formidable challenge on effectively the banking decision makers in terms of how to move things forward. So if we can go to please to the next slide. So if we look at what's happening from a global perspective in terms of, and also to a certain extent, the aspects related to the regional perspective on the impact on financial services, we see actually five major areas that are focusing, the banking executives are focusing on. The first one being driving more revenue growth, and we'll dig deeper into that. Rethinking their operating models, the pressure on digital and technology, but also the additional pressure and continuous pressure that comes from the regulatory landscape. But last but not least is the talent agenda. We'll go quickly through a number of those areas as well as we go through. Earlier, I mentioned a bit around the economic landscape and the macroeconomic landscape with increased money supply and lower interest rate environment, which impacts the balance sheets and the growth avenues for banks that are focused on effectively interest income and interest growth, which means that the banks have to explore new revenue avenues, and they are what we're seeing is significant influx on the mergers and acquisitions, and this slightly started before COVID-19, but also we see it accelerated in terms of COVID-19. But the interesting part that the mergers and acquisitions, it's not just going through a typical bank acquiring another, but also some of them are starting to change the approach to taking strategic input or access to a number of markets, especially through technology platforms as well. So even the nature of the merger and acquisition is changing from the old approach of buy a bank and let me take it over, to probably strategic stakes in fintechs or gaining access to markets through large and established banks. The other part, and the more interesting and evolving part that we have seen specifically growing, especially in light of COVID as well, is the fee-based income approach. Traditionally, the fee-based income was effectively a way to diversify through generating fees, generating from trade finance, expanding global transaction banking footprint, as a result of the demand of increased supply chain that has taken place as well. So that was one significant part that has been always taking place, but also the growth of platforms and ecosystems. Specifically, when we look at aspects relating to how can you basically look at creating an ecosystem around the banking sector and the banking platform that you have. As well. So basically, for example, if I am a small and medium enterprise, am I only just going to get from my bank just the financial services around the loans, or can the bank, for example, plug me into a wider platform that offers me ERP solutions, that offers me support on HR, that can actually offer me support on cross-leasing of assets, so on and so forth. And this is something that probably, if we spoke about almost a few years ago, that would have been in the realm of science fiction and theory, but now we're seeing many of these banks going into the platform and the ecosystem approaches, not just from a global perspective, but also from a regional perspective as well. And that, of course, requires a major shift in terms of how you would change the operating model from to be able to adapt to the environment. And when we look at the operating model itself, we're seeing specifically not just how you rethink which markets you want to play in, which channels that you want to play in, and we know that the number of banks has seen a significant surge in their digital channel usage. I'm sure you've probably seen that on the internet when the question was, who helped you in your digital transformation? Is it the consultant? Is it the chief digital officer? And the answer was COVID-19, right? And that is actually true. We've seen banks that have had a significant surge over more than sometimes 200% of increase in usage or more on the digital channel side. But also, if you look at the structural side, what is the element of nearshoring and tech optimization that can be applied to further make your organization structure move from a more CapEx model to a more OpEx model as well? So to allow for flexibility in case of shocks, to be able to reduce consumption, but also in case that you are actually growing as well, to actually get access more to that. But that is one side of things. The other side, when we look at the increase of the rethinking the operating model, but some banks have actually opted, instead of trying to reduce their CapEx, they actually now are sharing their CapEx, which is effectively looking at how would you expose your infrastructure and lease it, in a way, for the lack of a better word, to other banks. So basically, banking as a service model as well. And this is actually happening with a number of banks, not just globally, but also it's happening with a number of banks in the region as well, where they actually have invested significantly in a tech capability, and now they're sharing it and exposing it to fintechs, they're exposing it to other banks to use it, of course, for a fee. And that's another example of how banks are diversifying their revenue pools as well. So effectively, we're seeing a much wider specialization from that perspective. From an operational perspective, we are seeing a significant surge, not just the use of intelligent automation and RPA, which has actually been proven to be a significant power and enabler of banks and financial services in COVID. I can cite one personal experience where we had a client in the region who was, we just supported them in the first phase of their RPA implementation when their country went down into a full lockdown, and they were unable to access the bank as well, but yet their customers were continuously served by the robots that were actually, or the RPA software that was actually installed, and that has created a significant impact for them in the market. So it's not just about exploring intelligent automation from a cost reduction perspective, but also a more efficiency perspective. In addition, we're seeing a major drive towards process and customer experience re-engineering. So the good old conversation of business process re-engineering is coming back, and specifically as a number of banks are suffering from legacy legacy technology, but also trying to see how they can, in a fast way, become leaner, faster, and be able to serve their customers better. If I look at the other aspect that also to consider from a strategic operating model is the workforce optimization. And here, workforce optimization is not just letting people go. And what we've seen with a number of banks, they are trying to look at how they can repurpose, as a result of automation, certain capabilities into the new domains of working as they shift the operating model into more agile ways of working, the creation of squads, so on and so forth. They're trying to see how can they use their people in a better way. And that ties up with the item below, slightly below, which is around the talent agenda, where effectively you can see that right now, and there was an interesting article in The Economist a couple of weeks ago. It was around the global war for talent. Effectively, it's around the economy of scarcity as well. So we are living in a world that is with a shrinking set of resources, and specifically on the talent agenda capability, which is creating that talent war that you would see. So that has also changed, and we see a continuous push towards it. Moving swiftly to the digital and technology side, sorry if we can still go back to the previous slide. We're seeing a significant view around modernizing enterprise architecture, and primarily we're seeing two divergent ways of looking at it. One is organizations and banks that are reinvesting in core banking, and others that are actually shrinking the core and building peripheral systems around it. And that is a detail on its own that can be discussed. And the purpose of all of this is to try and become much faster in terms of delivery. We're seeing it's not on the market side. For example, there are banks right now on the corporate banking angle to try and time to cash, time to market in less than 5 days as well. And now we're seeing a reinvention of digital product delivery in a number of banks, trying to reduce effectively an idea to an MVP in less than 4 months as well, whereas the market average right now is somewhere around 18 months for the majority of the banks in the region. That's a significant change that requires a major upending of operating models as well. On the digital front, it's very important to also highlight, as a result of COVID-19, that there's an acceleration towards corporate banking and digital in corporate banking as well, to allow for specifically a wider implementation of new business models as well. So right now, retail apps and retail digital banking is taken for given the next forefront of fighting competition between banks is going to be within corporate banking and SME banking as well. Of course, the regulatory agenda keeps giving, specifically in light of major implications, not just the financial crime, but also more regulations around fintech, around regtech as well, and also the balance sheet management side of things as well. But the very interesting point is that right now we're seeing the rise of, as a result of COVID, the rise of a digital regulator, which means the regulators right now are actually at the forefront of trying to lead and enable digital adoption. We have some very interesting and good examples coming out from the regional central banks. Some of these regional central banks are investing in specifically innovation labs themselves to try and understand how the industry is shaping and how does that feed into the policy making from that perspective. Last but not least, and probably still the most important aspect of everything that's taking place, is the talent agenda. So there's an element of not just fighting for and getting the right talent and retaining the right talent, but also trying to see how you can actually reward the right talent and reskill the right talent as well. And that is probably one of the biggest advantages that can be provided by a bank if they invest the right way as well. And specifically investing in the new ways of working, as we're seeing the continuous split of people that are still more comfortable working from home and probably more efficient. And there's the data supports that, but also how you would lead in an environment that is actually distributed teams across. So if you can move to the next slide. So in essence, what does this mean in terms of how the COVID-19 is increasing the trends? It's very important to understand that COVID-19 has actually accelerated things that were already in the making, but actually made it a bit and moved a bit faster. So if you look at the retail banking sector side, effectively looking at a number of areas, not just, of course, Kuwait, which was cited specifically for major changes in that space, but across the region, the key focus right now is customer experience and customer differentiation. And everything is now, from a technology perspective, is shifting towards serving that. So if we look at the business shift specifically, we're looking at how you enhance customer experience on the retail side, individualization, the service offering, and of course, the marketplace and the platforms specifically. And from a technology perspective, how would all of that be aligned to serve the purpose of creating the best digital experience as well? Of course, this is easier said than done because it requires an element of creating a focus on what are the quick wins that can be delivered, but at the same time, the longer sustainable advantage as well. And this is where we see the majority of the banks are right now. Of course, there are a few banks ahead of the curve and still a number of banks behind the curve as well. And these ones that are behind the curve are probably going to be faced with significant competition and probably a growing gap in terms of their ability to catch up as customers are now behaving in a different way as well. From a corporate banking sector, we're seeing quite a similar aspect in terms of retail. However, the focus is right now on few main aspects. One is the faster onboarding. The second is, of course, the trusted advisor to client. And the third one that I would focus on is the age of the ecosystems as well. We know of banks, for example, in India right now that are creating Amazon-like platforms to compete with Amazon and bring all of its SMEs together. So this is where we're seeing the banks shifting from that direction. Next, please. So basically, when the banks right now, as they go through the change around trying to optimize their capability and benefit from the digital transformation that's taking place, the key part is looking at 8 areas specifically. One is understanding the customer. It's now we're going back again to basics around understanding the customer personas, how customers are behaving, and as a result, build propositions around that. The other part is not just strategy, but also agility. I think one thing that can be taken from the COVID-19 experience is basically how would you become agile? And a very interesting point, at least from my perspective, was an article that was done by one of the leading universities a year or so before COVID, and it was agility trumps strategy, right? And I'm just translating using titles slightly differently, but effectively it was a full-fledged article around how being an agile organization, and agile not in the context of agile ways of working, but the ability to have to respond quickly to changing circumstances is actually much more important than probably having the right necessary just focusing on strategy as well. And as a result, I think we've seen that companies that have been able or were ahead of the curve in terms of COVID-19 and were agile were able to better respond and reap better rewards. We know of banks in a number of their regions where they were not ready for this, and staff had to actually take desktops that they were in their offices, actually take them with them home, specifically because they didn't have enough laptops. We have examples of banks that where clients were trying to, or our clients, of course, but the banking staff were trying to share laptops as well. So it was very interesting to see in that how the mindset that was agile, flexible, and a bit more forward-looking was actually doing better as well. Going through the cycle, I think the most important part, it's not just, yes, we can talk through omni-channel, we can talk through streamlining operations, but I think two parts I think that are coming up that are very important. One is mindset to drive the right transformation going forward, and we have seen experiences and clients that when no matter you can put the state-of-the-art solution, but if there's a mindset that they don't want to transform or they are still resisting the transformation, nothing gets implemented. So the mindset to change is as important as the actual change itself, and that's the starting point. The other part is that the banks that are going to be the post-COVID area cannot operate in the traditional silo ways, and they have to move into more agile capabilities, given the significant competition that's coming from tech firms, fintechs, and other players in the market like telcos, so on and so forth. Next. So I'll probably try to close in a way here, specifically if we focus on the elements related to what we refer to as zero operations as well. And that is the core of where our organizations are moving right now in terms of very simply, how can they strengthen their core capability around operational excellence, specifically on process architecture, on technology, people and culture, to drive a digital transformation and to be able to create what you can refer to as a process factory, and along with a digital factory that allows both combined to keep churning and keep driving the organization forward at a faster pace. That's again easier said than done, because the first starting point would require the mindset, but also it requires significant work to drive into understanding how you can actually eliminate waste, introduce the right automation opportunities as well. For example, now we're seeing definitely more banks coming into talking around RPA, and however, RPA is not necessarily the answer to everything that's out there. So you have to expand the horizon in terms of what type of architecture and capability that you need to have. But the most important part that we're seeing from the zero operations is really around two main factors. The first is the external interface with ecosystems and the ability to bring those ecosystems to your customers. The second is the ability to take those production capabilities that you have to market at a faster and lower pace. And this requires the full way of operating to change. So in a way, what we'll see in the next few years, the number of banks and financial service institutions will move from the traditional corporate banking, retail banking departments into the more squad and the pods around a certain product where you have multi-dimensional teams working together and almost independently producing the output to their customers. So it is a completely changed landscape. And from that perspective, the organizations that are able to read that are the ones that understand that, are the ones that are going to reap the potential opportunity that comes that COVID-19 has presented to all of us. I believe that's it from my side. I'm more than happy to take your questions as we go through some of the key aspects, specifically on the key takeaways, but I'm happy to take questions right now. Any questions? themes.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you for the great workshop, Mr. Hussam. Our dear audience, thank you for supporting our event by attending and contributing. We hope you enjoyed the experience and received beneficial information. See you in our next workshops. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.